Officer Mark Callahan never imagined a routine dispatch would shatter the foundations of his world. The relentless drumming of rain on the patrol car's roof had been the night's only soundtrack, a monotonous rhythm for a monotonous shift. The call came in just after 2 a.m., a single-vehicle accident on the Old County Highway, a stretch of road notorious for its treacherous curves and the way the forest crowded its edges, swallowing the light. In the passenger seat, his K9 partner, Odin, a magnificent German shepherd with a coat as dark as the night itself, shifted, his ears twitching at the change in radio static. To Mark, it was just another wreck, another set of flashing lights in the dark, another report to file. But Odin's low, guttural whine, a sound Mark had heard only a handful of times, hinted otherwise. When they arrived, the scene was a chaotic tableau of red and blue light painting the slick, wet trees. A silver SUV lay crumpled in a ravine, its nose buried in the muddy earth like a fallen beast. Mark realized the truth was not in the twisted metal or the shattered glass, but in the unyielding, silent refusal of his partner to obey. What Odin's stubborn loyalty revealed left Mark breathless, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This was no ordinary crash site, it was a sanctuary, and his dog was its sole, silent guardian. If you've ever trusted an animal's instinct over your own, you know the feeling that was beginning to dawn on Mark. Stay with us to see how one dog's incredible devotion rewrote the definition of a miracle. The air was thick with the metallic tang of leaked fluids and the earthy scent of disturbed soil. Firefighters and paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their yellow rain slickers stark against the gloom. Mark grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp cone through the drizzle, and made his way down the slippery embankment. Odin was at his heel, a silent shadow, his powerful form moving with a grace that belied the treacherous terrain. The SUV was on its side, the driver's side door pried open by the jaws of life. A paramedic, his face grim under the fluorescent glow of a work light, was stabilizing the driver, a woman, unconscious and pale. "We are getting her out now," he yelled over the generator's hum. "Vitals are thready, but she's fighting." Mark nodded, his role now to secure the scene, to document, to be the calm center in the storm of procedure. He did a quick sweep around the vehicle, his boots sinking into the soft mud. The impact had been brutal. The front end was unrecognizable, and the roof had buckled inward. It was a testament to modern engineering that anyone had survived at all. He shone his light inside the vehicle, past a spiderweb of cracks on the windshield. The interior was a disaster of deployed airbags and personal belongings thrown about like confetti. Then he saw it in the back. A child's car seat, its cheerful pink and gray fabric a jarring note in the symphony of destruction. It was empty. A cold dread, colder than the rain seeping into his collar, washed over him. "Sarge," he called into his radio, his voice tight. "We have an empty car seat in the vehicle. Possibility of a second victim, likely a child." The radio crackled back an affirmation, and the tone of the entire operation shifted. The measured urgency became a frantic, desperate race against time. The search began immediately. Teams fanned out into the woods, their flashlights dancing through the dense, dripping undergrowth. The working theory was grim but logical: the child had been ejected. Every second that passed, the chances of finding them alive diminished. The cold, the rain, the unforgiving wilderness, it was a nightmare scenario. "Odin, search!" Mark commanded, his voice sharp with an urgency that his partner had been trained to recognize. This was what they did. This was their dance. Mark would give the command, and Odin, with his superior senses, would cast a net of scent and sound into the darkness, finding what no human could. But Odin didn't move. He stood stock still, his head lowered, his gaze fixed not on the sprawling forest, but back on the mangled wreck of the SUV. He let out another low, mournful whine. "Odin, what is it?" "Search," Mark repeated, tugging gently on the dog's collar. Odin resisted, planting his paws firmly in the mud. His muscles were coiled springs of tension. He looked up at Mark, his intelligent brown eyes filled with an expression that Mark couldn't decipher. It wasn't defiance. It was something else. Something profound. Something that felt like a plea. Frustration began to bubble in Mark's chest. He didn't have time for this. A child was out there, alone and freezing. Damn it, Odin, now is not the time for games. Let's go. He gave a harder tug on the leash. Odin responded by taking a step back, pulling against him, his eyes never leaving the wreck. Then, with a resolve that stunned Mark, the dog walked deliberately to a spot near the vehicle's undercarriage, a place obscured by a thicket of ferns and a twisted piece of the car's frame. He lay down, curling his body into a protective crescent shape, and refused to budge. The search teams were now 50 yards into the woods, their shouts and the crackle of their radios growing fainter. Mark felt a surge of helpless anger. His best tool, his partner, the dog he trusted with his life, was being obstinate, useless. "What is wrong with you?" he muttered, kneeling beside the dog. Odin just looked at him, then nudged his nose against the damp earth he was guarding. Mark's training, his experience, every procedural instinct he had, screamed at him to drag the dog away and force him to join the search. The protocol was clear: in an ejection scenario, you create an expanding grid from the point of impact. You do not fixate on the vehicle itself. But then he looked at Odin again. He saw the subtle tremor in the dog's powerful frame, the way his ears were pinned back not in aggression, but in deep, anxious concentration. This wasn't stubbornness. This was a message. Mark had spent thousands of hours training with this animal. He knew his every bark, every growl, every subtle shift in posture. He had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own eyes. And right now, Odin's instincts were screaming that everyone was wrong. They were all looking in the wrong place. Hesitantly, Mark placed a hand on Odin's back. The dog's muscles were rigid. "What is it, boy? What have you got?" he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. He unclipped the leash, a gesture of trust. Odin didn't move. He simply pressed his body tighter against the ground, a living shield. Mark made a decision that went against every rule in the book. He keyed his radio. "Sarge, hold the grid search for a minute. My K9 is indicating on the vehicle." "I'm going to check it out." The response was laced with skepticism. "Callahan, the kid isn't in the car. We've cleared it. Get your dog into the woods." "Just give me 2 minutes, Mark insisted, his voice hardening with a conviction he didn't fully feel. "Trust me. Or rather, trust him." There was a pause, filled with the hiss of static and the weight of a life hanging in the balance. 2 minutes, Callahan. Then you get that dog on the track." Mark turned his full attention to the small patch of ground Odin was so fiercely protecting. It was a chaotic mess. Mud, slick with rain and oil, was mixed with shattered safety glass that glittered like cruel diamonds in his flashlight beam. A large piece of the car's chassis was bent downwards, creating a small, dark overhang. It looked like nothing. Just another piece of the wreckage. He got down on his hands and knees, the cold mud instantly soaking through his pants. The air here was heavy with the smell of gasoline. He could feel the stares of the other first responders, their impatience a palpable force. They thought he was wasting precious time, humoring a disobedient animal. Maybe they were right. Odin let out a soft huff of air, his warm breath misting in the cold. He nudged Mark's hand with his wet nose, a silent encouragement. Okay, I'm looking," Mark murmured. He pushed aside a clump of uprooted ferns. His gloved fingers sank into the soft, cloying mud. He felt something hard, a rock, probably. He kept digging, his sense of foolishness growing with every passing second. The 2 minutes were almost up. He could already hear the sergeant's voice in his head, ordering him back to the search. He was about to give up, to stand up and apologize for wasting time, when he heard it. It was a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible, easily mistaken for the dripping of rain or the rustle of leaves. A tiny, hiccuping whimper. Mark froze. Every nerve ending in his body went on high alert. "Everyone, be quiet," he yelled, his voice cracking with a sudden, wild hope. The sounds of the rescue operation died down, replaced by the hushed whisper of the rain. He held his breath, listening. There it was again. A weak, mewling cry, muffled and close. It was coming from beneath the piece of twisted metal, from the very spot Odin refused to leave. With a surge of adrenaline, Mark began to dig in earnest, scooping away handfuls of mud and debris with a frantic energy. Odin watched him, whining softly, his body trembling with anticipation. "I hear you," Mark whispered to the unseen source of the sound. "I hear you. Hold on. We are coming." A paramedic, realizing something was happening, scrambled down the embankment to help. Together, they worked to clear the space. Mark's fingers brushed against something soft and yielding. It wasn't mud or metal. It was fabric. He carefully pulled it back. It was a small, pink fleece blanket, miraculously clean on one side. And tucked beneath it, nestled in a small hollow of earth that had been formed by the crash, was the baby. She was tiny, no more than 6 months old, her face pale and smudged with dirt. Her eyes were closed, but her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. She was wrapped in the blanket, which must have cushioned her, as she was thrown from the car seat, not out into the woods, but down, into this small pocket of survival. The twisted frame of the SUV had shielded her from the crushing impact, and Odin's body had shielded her from the cold, wind, and rain. The dog had not been refusing to search. He had been refusing to abandon his post. He had been guarding her all along. "I've got her. She's alive," Mark shouted, his voice thick with emotion. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, a beacon of impossible hope in the darkness. Then the scene erupted. Paramedics swarmed the area, their movements swift and precise. They gently lifted the infant, wrapping her in thermal blankets and rushing her towards the waiting ambulance. Odin finally stood, his duty done. He walked over to Mark and leaned his heavy head against his handler's leg, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. Mark wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in his thick fur, oblivious to the mud and the rain. "Good boy, Odin," he whispered, his voice choked. "You good boy. You saved her." The ambulance carrying the baby, whose name they learned was Lily, sped away, its siren a wail of victory against the night. Mark and Odin followed in the patrol car. The rain had started to ease, the frantic drumming replaced by a gentle patter. The world outside the windshield seemed softer, the colors less harsh. Mark drove on autopilot, his mind replaying the events of the last hour. He had been so close to failing. So close to ignoring the one voice, the one instinct, that mattered. He had been blinded by procedure, by the rigid structure of his training. Odin had seen the truth. He hadn't needed a search grid, or a theory of trajectory. He had heard a faint cry, smelled the scent of a helpless child, and understood his mission with a purity that humbled Mark to his core. He had a duty to protect, and he had performed it flawlessly, standing his ground against his handler, against the world, because he knew he was right. At the hospital, the news was cautiously optimistic. Lily's mother was out of surgery, and was expected to make a full recovery. Lily herself was being treated for hypothermia and a few minor scrapes, but she was, by all accounts, a miracle. The doctors couldn't explain how a baby could survive such a violent ejection with so few injuries. But Mark knew. She hadn't been violently ejected. She had been delivered into a small, muddy cradle, protected by steel and then by flesh and fur. He and Odin waited in the stark, sterile hallway. Nurses and doctors bustled past, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. A man, his face ashen with fear, rushed in, Lily's father. After being briefed by the doctors, he came over to Mark. "You're the officer who found her?" he asked, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a gratitude so profound it was painful to look at. "My dog found her," Mark corrected him gently, gesturing to Odin, who sat patiently at his feet. The man knelt down, his hand hesitating before stroking Odin's head. "They told me, they said he laid over her. Kept her warm, he wouldn't move," Mark confirmed, his voice quiet. "He wouldn't let any of us near her until he knew we were there to help." The father choked back a sob, and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. Odin, who was usually reserved with strangers, allowed the embrace, even leaning into it, as if he understood the man's need for contact, for a way to express a gratitude that words could never contain. In the weeks that followed, the story of Officer Callahan and his heroic K-9 spread. They were local heroes, a testament to the incredible bond between a man and his dog. But for Mark, it was something far more personal. The incident had chipped away at the cynicism he had allowed to build up over the years, a callus formed by seeing too much tragedy, too much loss. Odin had reminded him that instinct, loyalty, and a stubborn refusal to give up could be more powerful than any procedure or protocol. He looked at his partner differently now. He saw not just a tool for law enforcement, but a being with a deep, intuitive wisdom that transcended human understanding. He had always respected Odin, but now, he revered him. He trusted him with an absoluteness that was new and profound. Their bond, forged in the crucible of that rainy night, was unbreakable. They were more than just partners. They were a single unit, operating on a level of silent communication that few could comprehend. Mark learned to listen better, not just with his ears, but with his gut. He paid more attention to Odin's subtle cues, the flick of an ear, the slight stiffness in his posture, the low rumble in his chest. These were not random animal behaviors, they were a language, and Mark was finally becoming fluent. The change was reflected in their work. They found a missing hiker in a dense forest when the human search teams had all but given up, all because Odin caught a faint scent on an updraft that everyone else had missed. They de-escalated a tense standoff, because Odin sensed the suspect's fear beneath his aggression, allowing Mark to approach with empathy instead of force. Several months later, on a bright, sunny afternoon, Mark and Odin paid a visit to Lily's family. They were greeted at the door by Lily's father, his face now free of the terror that had haunted it in the hospital hallway. Come in, come in. She's just waking up from her nap," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. They stepped inside a home filled with the cheerful clutter of a young family. Laughter echoed from another room. Lily's mother, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise fully recovered, came out to greet them, her eyes shining. "There's our hero," she said, not looking at Mark, but kneeling down to scratch Odin behind the ears. Odin wagged his tail, a rare and happy gesture. Then they brought out Lily. She was sitting up now, a healthy, happy baby with bright, curious eyes. When she saw Odin, a huge, gummy smile spread across her face. She reached out her chubby hands, babbling excitedly. Mark watched, his heart swelling, as the huge, formidable police dog lowered his head gently, allowing the baby to grab a fistful of his fur. Odin didn't flinch. He just stood there, a patient, gentle giant, letting the child he had saved explore his face with her tiny fingers. In that moment, the lines blurred between a trained K-9 and a guardian angel. He was both. It was a connection forged in trauma and darkness, a bond that would forever link a little girl and the dog who refused to leave her side. Mark knew this was a memory he would carry with him for the rest of his life, a perfect, sunlit image that would forever chase away the shadows of that dark, rainy night. He saw the universe not as a series of random, chaotic events, but as a tapestry woven with threads of unseen connection, of loyalty that defies logic, and of courage found in the most unexpected of hearts. A year passes. The memory of the crash is no longer a source of trauma, but a story of hope, a family legend that will be told to Lily for the rest of her life. What began as a routine call on a dark night became a profound lesson in trust and the silent, powerful language of instinct. It's a reminder that sometimes the most heroic acts aren't born from grand plans or strategic thinking, but from a simple, unshakable refusal to abandon hope, a stubborn loyalty that plants itself in the mud and refuses to yield. Mark Callahan's final realization was that his most important job wasn't just to enforce the law, but to listen to the silent truths the world offered him, especially those spoken by his four-legged partner. In a quiet field behind his house, Mark throws a worn tennis ball. Odin, no longer a stoic police dog on duty but a joyful, bounding creature of pure energy, leaps to catch it. The setting sun casts them in a golden light, two partners, two friends, forever bound by the miracle they unearthed in the rain. We ask that you share this story, not just for the drama, but as a tribute to the silent protectors and the incredible bonds that make us better humans. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed an animal's incredible intuition firsthand. Your stories remind us all that heroes come in every shape and every species. Subscribe for more incredible journeys that restore our faith in the connections that save us.